My name is Eric Myers. I'm with the Chattanooga Design Studio, and welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. It's a pleasure and an honor to see all of you here for CIVIQ. This is our quarterly speaker series that we offer honoring Robert Taylor. It's a pleasure for each one of you to be here tonight, and I really appreciate each one of you attending tonight. It's a great turnout. I have a few thanks, and then I want to turn it over to some good friends that are partnering with us on this program. So first and foremost, thank you to the Public Library for hosting our event tonight. If you've been to CIVIQ, who's been to CIVIQ this year yet? Yeah, this has been a great venue. The Public Library is just such a great asset in our community, and we really appreciate the partnership with the library and Will and all the staff to make this place accessible to everyone for this educational series. Thank you to the Lyndhurst Foundation for funding CIVIQ for so long, for so many years. We're so grateful for the support to have this educational program. I think I'm still getting feedback here. And so with the Lyndhurst Foundation support, we have been running this series now for 7 years. It's pretty incredible to have this quarterly speaker series opportunity in the educational program in this community for 7 years. And so again, I really appreciate that. And lastly, this evening wouldn't have been available to you all without an incredible partnership with the Trust for Public Land and their partnership as a committing sponsor for this event tonight. I really appreciate the Trust for Public Land. Not only for partnering with us, but for being a great asset to this community and doing the wonderful work that they do, whether it's the Alton Park Connector or work like you're going to hear about tonight. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Noel Durant, the Tennessee State Director of the Trust for Public Land.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you, Ginger, and all of the Chattanooga Design Studio team for inviting us to partner with you for this, what I think will be a really impactful speaker for tonight. And I did want to share a few words of sort of how I've been reflecting on framing this conversation as it relates to some of our work. And every place, whether it's a cemetery, a library building, a piece of riverfront, even a landfill, holds value and potential if we take the time to look for it. What we nurture and pay attention to will thrive. What we don't will not. This is true both of our relationships with people and with places. I'm compelled to share a section of one of my favorite poems by the poet laureate of place, Wendell Berry, who says, "Because we have not made our lives fit our places, the forests are ruined, the fields eroded, the streams polluted, the mountains overturned. Hope then to belong to your place by your own knowledge of what it is that no other place is, and by caring for it as you care for no other place. This place that you belong to, though it is not yours, for it was from the beginning and will be to the end, belong to your place by knowledge of the others who are your neighbors in it." When we talk about places forgotten, or worse, desecrated, we owe it to ourselves to remember how quickly a memory fades, or how quickly that place is desecrated, but how long those scars can endure. If you saw the field, an abandoned municipal cemetery on the flanks of Stringer's Ridge, you'd be right to describe it in its current state as desecrated. However, we can find a lot of hope in knowing that there are people, including many in this room, who are committed to repairing this place as it never was, a place of instruction, remembrance, and healing. If the story of Chattanooga, and especially the story of Trust for Public Land, teaches us anything, it's that our past does not necessarily predict our future. Our past mistakes don't need to imprison us. If we pay attention to the past and what the past is trying to tell us, it can actually liberate us. It's up to us to listen. The landscape architect you'll hear from this evening is a dear friend of TPL. someone who has worked around the world on projects similar to the field. We're fortunate to have him because of his enthusiasm for this work and for our community is inspiring and infectious. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for your partnership and creativity and a shared belief in our mission that protecting and creating parks for people can ensure healthy, livable communities for generations to come. And with that, please join me in welcoming Thomas Woltz to CIVIQ.
Don't look. Okay. Oh, we have to kill these. I'm sorry. I'm nothing without my pictures, I'm afraid. Can you kill the wall wash? The blue lights? Sorry about that. I need you to see the pictures. This is the bigger problem. Can it turn that way? I'm better in the dark. Trust me on that. Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. I am incredulous that this many people were willing to come listen to me talk, but I am thrilled and moved, in fact, by your presence tonight. I want to thank the Chattanooga Design Studio for sponsoring this incredible lecture series, bringing this to the people, and to the Trust for Public Land, who have been long friends of mine. Because I admire their work so much, I've sought them out in cities across the United States. Just a little bit about Nelson Byrd Woltz Landscape Architects. We're a 50-person landscape architecture firm with 2 offices, one in Charlottesville, Virginia, and one in New York City. And I want to emphasize that the work you're going to see tonight is the fruit of the labor of this incredible talent pool. I just want to start with that as a foundational principle. I am the spokesperson for this incredible work, and I am lucky to work with a staff that comes from extraordinarily diverse backgrounds, trainings, and we've come together to try to figure out what is the definition of landscape architecture and to have a values-driven practice that puts the things in the world that we believe in. To make that public, night before last in New York City, we launched our new book that I just wanted to tell you about because it is, in a way, our effort to define what we do and make that public. Most of our work, as you'll see, is public parks. And so we did a book that's the last 10 years of 12 public parks around the United States and Canada. And we entitled it, The Land is Full. And I called it The Land is Full because that really strikes at the heart of what we believe in our practice. As the beautiful thing that Noel just read, know where you are. That is such a beautiful idea. Know the place you are, love the place you are, and protect the place you are. This idea that beneath our very feet is land that evolved over millions of years of ecological history in this extraordinary dance with human history. Our firm has evolved over the years to have 2 research groups right at the heart of our practice. One is conservation biologists and restoration ecologists, and the other cultural landscape historians with specializations in landscapes of enslavement and indigenous landscapes and lifeways. If you're working in North America, you will touch one and most likely both of indigeneity and landscapes of bondage. So how dare one start to touch land without asking the land its story? And that's where we begin. We've now formalized that into what we call pre-design services, which is actually a research-driven period of time to learn the land. To me, this is grace in touching the landscape and working with the landscape and making any alterations to the landscape. Let's learn its story. A year ago, Daniela Peterson of the Trust for Public Land Chattanooga office came to a lecture I gave for the African American Museum Association that was in Nashville. And I was asked to come and present our work with, we have a collaboration with Peter Cook of HGA Architects, where we restored the burial ground of the enslaved people of Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. And we designed and built a contemplative site for the descendants of the enslaved people. This has been long and powerful work in the fruit of 2 years of listening sessions with the descendants. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation asked that I would just come and sit in the room, and people would say, "Do you work here?" And I'm like, "I don't work here, I'm just listening." But we got to know each other as human beings, and I listened to these stories that were the fruit of 28 years of the Getting Word project that Monticello has pioneered. So I wanted to show you that this evening, because that was how Daniela came up, and she said, "I need to tell you about the field in Chattanooga. You need to know about this place." And so a few weeks later, I came over with Liz McLaren from the Land Trust for Tennessee. She drove me from Nashville to Chattanooga, and we went to visit this site. And when you go there, it will change you. It is an extraordinarily powerful site that speaks volumes about a story we haven't told. I'm not working on it. I've just come to see it. Today was only my second time there, so I'm not presenting about the field. I am trying to underscore for your community, one, how important it is, two, how essential it is to tell the truth in our public story and narrative, and three, a few small examples of projects similar to the field that we have done that might help you think about what is the process it takes to do this work. What could it look like? How could it operate? So I'm going to dive in. I have just short case studies, but I have 6 of them. And if you fall asleep, I will only do 4 or 5. But just briefly, this is kind of our breakdown. I'm sorry it's so washed out, but you're seeing 60% public landscapes, public parks, including arboretum and botanic gardens, waterfronts, riverfronts, urban parks, and rural parks and conservation lands. About 25% is cultural institutions, that's arts organizations and university campuses. And then the conservation agriculture is where we really rebuild wildlife connectivity in productive landscapes and transform them into regenerative practices. Just a couple of images. The one on the upper left is Lakeshore Park that has been under construction for 6 or 7 years now. We've just finished some major phases, and that is held in easement by the Land Trust for Tennessee. When I met Liz McLaren, I was trying to present our little portfolio and saying, like, we've done a lot of work in Tennessee. And she's like, I know. And I was like, how do you know? And she's like, because I own them all. No. She never said that. She holds easements. The Land Trust for Tennessee holds easements on many of these public landscapes and has been a terrific partner as we work toward biodiversity, climate resilience, erasing barriers for public engagement of the land. So the values of the Land Trust for Tennessee, we hope, are evident in the projects that we've done. On the lower right is Centennial Park in Nashville. Memorial Park is a park in Houston. These are cultural institutions, the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Peabody Essex Museum. We're doing a couple of projects for the African American Heritage Action Fund. That's a branch of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, doing the John and Alice Coltrane Home and the childhood home in Tryon, North Carolina of Nina Simone. So the Nina Simone Childhood Home is under construction right now. This is just some slides of the conservation agriculture work that we've worked at over the last 25 years. So the last category, and I think the subject of our next book, I'm calling Sites of Memory. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. That's the sector I really want to discuss because I feel it's so relevant to the field. Is there any chance you could turn this? It's got that hollow ringy again. You know that. Okay. This is showing, the lower right is a 300-year-old burial ground of the Maori people in Orongo Station in the North Island of New Zealand. And this was one of the first times 22 years ago that a person of color approached me and said, we do not care what color you are because you have the tools we need to protect and preserve our landscape. Sit with that for a second. As a white boy from a tobacco farm in Mount Airy, North Carolina, that was a major step because I, like a lot of people, felt like I shouldn't be in the room. I shouldn't participate in the conversation around memorialization of the Maori elders because I'm not one of you. And they assured me that they did not care what I looked like because I had tools that could help protect and preserve their landscapes into the future. And that was a major breakthrough for me of someone at 23 years old felt this was not a place I could enter a conversation. And that opened a gateway of finding that I was ready to offer my toolkit to the stories of others without appropriating their story, but rather finding ways to make that story live for future generations to see. Some of the examples I'm going to show are stories that were intentionally erased or hidden that we found inadvertently through our research process. Our research process is not inadvertent, quite intentionally. We just didn't know what we were going to discover. The upper left is the contemplative site at Monticello and Memorial Park in Houston. So I'm going to start with the Ecological Commons at Georgia Tech. This was a wonderful commission, 9 acres of asphalt parking lot and a police station they were willing to tear down that they wanted to transform into a living laboratory in partnership with the different departments at Georgia Tech. So biology, conservation, hydrology, soils, these very different elements of this landscape were to be monitored and managed by the students and the different departments. So we met with faculty, we met with students. We decided we would showcase Piedmont ecosystems and divided the site into different ecotypes based on hydrology and topography. You know, we're just sort of like, it's like knitting by the fire. And you're just like, oh, this is nice, this is pleasant, this is exactly what we do. This is really, really lovely. Another thing that made it wonderful is that upper left image is the master plan that Nelson Byrd Woltz did 16 years ago for Georgia Tech. And we've been building project by project. Not all of them, some of them went to others, but we've had a drumbeat of construction at Georgia Tech. This was the first time they commissioned a landscape without a building. Note to self, it's a really good idea for campuses to commission a landscape without it being part of the major building. Because what happens is the building goes over budget and they take the landscape budget and you get a tree and a sidewalk. Boo, we don't like that. So Georgia Tech, in its brilliance, said, we're going to commission a 9-acre living laboratory, and we don't want it to look like Tech Green, a big rectangle of grass. We want it to be fecund and fertile and fun for the students, but also meet these scientific criteria. I'm going to describe this project in sort of 2 parts. We have the happy, bum, 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 this is really nice, this is lovely work, and then the other like, oh, we need to talk. So we have that kind of duality here. And the we need to talk part is that through our cultural research, we discovered that one of the most important turning points of the civil rights movement was embedded in this site, in the asphalt parking lot, where this building had been torn down and paved over, never to be thought of again. So in the analysis, you can see the upper red dashed zone is our site. The creek had been piped many years ago. It turned out it was 13 feet below grade. Our ecologist, Biohabitat, said, if you exhume that stream, it's not going to help anybody. It's so deep and unzipped. So what we did was look at that dendritic pattern and make a surface analogous drainage way that took the roof water of all the new buildings that are around and brought it through the site, processed it, the stormwater, cleaned it, and conveyed it along what is the master plan that we had been working on for 16 years. That's the topography, the historic topography of the site from this early map that was very useful in recreating that on the surface. This is the site as it exists. You can see mostly asphalt parking, and the police station is the white rectangle to the left inside the red dashed box. This is the master plan where this Engage is a very high hill with beautiful copse of old white oaks. So we put in slides for the kids to have fun. We did a grove of hammocks. And like I said, you couldn't have a happier project. Everyone has enjoyed this. These are the ecotones that we were able to construct on the site based on soils, topography, and solar aspects. So prairie, oak, pine, hickory, woodland, open mesic forest, seepage wet meadow, and a tiny sliver of lawn. That crescent around the big orange thing was the only little bit of lawn we did. And we had duck habitat, actually. So this is the constructed project. You can see the slides are these three fingers going from, you can see the massive white oaks at the top of this hill. Every time the sidewalks go to wood, you're crossing water, so there's an intuitive awareness of your interaction with the hydrology of the site. Yeah, the learning dock is the bar in the upper right. So this is what it looks like. Georgia Tech is very close to downtown. This is immediately after planting. The worst thing in a landscape architect's life is a ribbon cutting. Don't go. Go 2 years later. Just don't go at first. What I love is like the joy on this guy's face as he's passing the beehives, which have, the bees go in at the very top, so their flyway is not interrupted by people walking by. They go in the top and all the way down. This is just pictures of it being used. What I love about this place is you have collective areas, you have the hammocks that students are enjoying, and you have these places for solace and meditation. We thought a lot about the stresses of students' lives and how students need places to think and meditate and process their world. This is the warm season and perennial meadow. You can see the arc of Nyssa sylvatica with the hammocks underneath. The learning dock, 2 people in my office were like, shoot, there are no students, it's so early. Can somebody sit in this picture? And overuse. So these things were happening simultaneously, but I decided tonight to tell them slightly separately to not confound them. This patch of grass, pavement, and asphalt is where our research revealed the Pickrick Diner stood. It is that upper left rectangle, so I'm showing the same slide again, but the upper left rectangle with the 3 evergreen trees, that is where we suggested that we should build a contemplative site to racial injustice. The word back from Georgia Tech was like, well, that's not the commission. You know, we have this beautiful living laboratory, and our response was, really, why bother with ecological health if we can't also discuss social health? We need to be healthy in a society in order to steward these ecological places. So let's make that step forward together. So here's the story. The bottom image is the Pickrick Diner owned by Lester Maddox. He was the governor of Georgia just before Jimmy Carter. So for anybody my age, that doesn't seem very long ago. And he, rather than serve black people in his restaurant, he paid the $200 a day fine for a little while, and then he shut down. The upper left is the law, we call it. July 2nd, 1964, the Civil Rights Act is passed. The next day, 3 students, Alfred Lee Dunn, George Willis, and Woodrow Lewis, students at the International Presbyterian Seminary College, not at Georgia Tech, came to eat at the restaurant to exert their rights from the Civil Rights Act passed the day before. They were assaulted, beaten, and there's a picture of Lester Maddox himself with a pistol running them out of his restaurant. They suffered these abuses on that day, and Constance Baker Motley is the first African-American woman to present to the Supreme Court of the United States. She won, and by July 17th, civil rights was assured for all people. This is an enormous story at every level, and it's held right in the middle of the eco-commons. And so this rose to be a very important part of this. So suddenly, a park about ecology became a park about assuring that people understood the power of civil rights and the fact that you're standing in the authentic spot where something very important happened. So this is our idea of the memorial. Georgia Tech has a type of wall that they really like. It is granite veneer. And I got in a little trouble because I referred to it as a venereal wall. I don't love it, but it's the standard wall, so we're going to use that wall. So I thought, well, we need a different kind of wall to start to talk about this issue. So we introduced this long, dark gray concrete wall. And the idea is that is the barrier between all of us and the truth. That is the barrier for many people between them and justice. And that is what the Civil Rights Act was about. So these three openings in this diagrammatic idea are that a space was made for all of us to enter the conversation thanks to these three heroic men. That piece of wall moves forward and it grows to heroic proportion, heroic scale, reminding us of them. You do not enter this space without confronting their heroism. You then move around. The white box is showing where the building was. You move into the space, and there are three long wooden benches representing their ultimate sacrifice and eventual death. And in the distance are three longleaf pines that remind us of the hope of long, long life and evergreen life. In this whole sector, these are the only three evergreen trees. So this diagram is showing you these key elements of the memorial site. So this is the Georgia Tech typical wall, and what it's really doing is pushing you to confront this place. It's arcing in a way that brings you to this other wall. I hope, it is a thing of beauty as well. It is stark. It is making a point. And this is what I have lower left is moving into the site and around this tablet. The upper right are these benches, and we wanted them to, almost like sitting around a fire, sort of crackle with light, that it would be welcoming in the evening, low light, but a warm and welcoming site. And this is it, this is the memorial site. This has become a huge part of Georgia Tech's curriculum. It's been the cover of the alumni magazine, and it is functioning. The community named it Unity Plaza. And a lot of events have happened here since it opened late pandemic. This is it in fall color, where this group of nisses dropped these red leaves onto the black crushed granite, and students are using it for exactly the purpose, which is to reflect and remember and understand that Georgia Tech is open to this conversation. This is really important for cities and institutions and universities, I think, to say we have a place where we can discuss. This is it in the evening. These are the benches illuminated inside, so it's a warm place that students can come even at night. Here you can see it in summer, and we planted warm season grasses that snap to brown before any of the other plants. So in fall you can literally see the footprint of the Pickerick Diner and its proximity to downtown Atlanta. I'm going to take us next to Monticello and show you one of the two projects that I mentioned. This is the contemplative site for the descendants of the enslaved people. This is the project we did with Peter Cook of HGA Architects as our teammate. It was an extremely collaborative project, and in the lower left, in each project, you're seeing the people in the firm that worked on the project. I had to write, or I was asked to write an article about Thomas Jefferson as a landscape architect. Like, what would that be for the 18th century? And I thought, well, this guy was pretty good at surveying, grading, drainage, architecture. Like, he did a lot of the tools that landscape architecture is. And he had drawn this map and surveyed this himself. And that red star is where we eventually located this memorial. Not memorial really, but a contemplative site. This is about labor. This is remembering those who, as the book by Cinder Stanton says, those who labor for my happiness was a book that she wrote. The title of that book was a quote from Jefferson. In this map, what I found when writing this article, is a book that Rizzoli did on Jefferson, is that there's an upper arc, and that was the first roundabout. That is called the 1 in 20, and just below it is another arc called the 1 in 10, and I realized that's 1 foot of grade change for every 10 feet, and 1 foot of grade change for every 20 feet. The 1 in 20 road was reserved for horses, pleasure riding, and strolling. The 1 in 10 road was for slaves. The enslaved people brought water from a spring all the way down the side of the mountain on that route up the steep hill to the mountaintop where Jefferson had built Monticello without any drinking water. Life came to the mountain on the backs and hands of the enslaved people every day, drinking, bathing, and cooking. So we thought, this has a very specific arc. It had been lost. It wasn't mentioned, it wasn't interpreted. Erosion over the years had smoothed out that field. If you walked into the woods, click, there it was. It was like when you get to the field and there's a road in the forest. You can see that road protected by the trees' roots. So we thought, what if we take the arc of that road, offset it, and that is the arc that we confront with the names of the enslaved, the 607 enslaved people that Thomas Jefferson owned. So this is the LiDAR that helped us cite and find that. You can see the North Spring at the top, and the dashed line is the arc that gave body to the contemplative site. This is the design of it. The red dot is right at this arcing wall. It overlooks the actual, that authentic route. Best archaeological practices, we didn't excavate. What we're doing is planting and letting grasses grow up around it and then mowing that line so you always see it parallel to the wall above. And then built up the grade. As you can see, the red is the existing grade. We built up the grade so there'd be a flat area for gathering. This is a lot to get built in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I have to say. It's a tiny project, but you can see the construction in this open field. And you can see the mowing, that's what has erased that path over the years. You know, it's a path that I think, not in current Monticello, is very clear about truth-telling, but maybe for previous generations, it was a path that was quite welcome to disappear. This is the gathering at opening day. Unlike our restoration of the burial ground where hundreds of descendants came, this was reserved really for a small group of descendants. That is Peter Cook on the left, who partnered with us on the project, Nia Bates, who led the Getting Word project, and Andrew Davenport, who is the current leader of the Getting Word project and the liaison with the descendant community. So what you're seeing is this very long wall with all of the names that research has revealed of the enslaved people. But it's in this weathering steel that looks a little bit like the brick walls of Monticello, and the light comes through the names to you as you look. And in detail, you can see how each name is almost like a brick in a wall. It fits into this landscape. It is not hidden. It is right at the end of the east lawn. At the end, it's very much part of the central core, the historic core, not hidden away. But it is at the end of Mulberry Row, which was the road of labor at Monticello. So it is a fitting place to stop and deal with everything you might have heard for the first time. There are a lot of people who come to Monticello, as Clint Smith's book, How the Word is Passed, illustrated so beautifully, of people shocked to know that Jefferson had been an enslaver. So this is looking up that meadow. You're seeing the road is very evident, that route of labor, and that is what gave form to the memorial. I feel like this research process, you know, documents, letters, wills, notes that people sent to one another, we get all of this together, and then that's the power of design, is to synthesize all of that into something no one ever thought about. It is an iterative process. It's one that the stories and words that people give us, these documents, they sort of almost ferment into rich and creative ideas, and that's how we get to these places. Years ago, we competed for the Ed Johnson Memorial Competition. We were a finalist, we were not selected, but I thought in light of the field, showing you our process might be relevant. So I'm going to go back through this. This was one of the competition boards, and part of our idea, I assume everyone in the room knows the tragic story of Ed Johnson, so I won't go into that, but in order to communicate the arc of that and put us into the timeline, we talked about the enslavement happening here, 1893, 1906, Ed Johnson, the lynching of Ed Johnson, and Stiles, Hutchins, and Noah Pardon, taking the court case to the Supreme Court, habeas corpus being applied to all peoples, the exoneration in 2000, and then 2018 when the competition was held. We wanted to bring people to this authentic place, remind them of the power of habeas corpus, what that means for all of us to be treated equally, and also to use this as a place to address the inevitable tensions that would always arise within our society. So it was to absolutely tell his story clearly, but then be a place of conversation in the future. So we put the quote on these massive stone walls, "God bless you all, I am an innocent man." That was what he said as he was being hanged. And then nothing less than our civilized society is at stake, a quote from Noah Pardon. The wall on the left is 4 feet thick of limestone, and the 2 walls facing the river, of which there are a lot of views of the river. So we made this point that to get that view, you must pass this reality. And you step as an individual onto this balcony that looks to the truss from which he hanged. And you also get the sweeping view of the river. This is what the memorial complex looked like of the Walnut Street Bridge. And so the site that was designated for the memorial, we basically put these 2 walls to create a plaza, a space. First and foremost, it holds Ed Johnson's story. You have the stair that sweeps down to below the bridge, continuing that narrative. This is a section. This is looking at the stair and the individual balcony where you as a person can confront these histories and this story while looking at your beautiful city. Stepping back in the plaza, you as a community can discuss whatever issues might be at hand. This was intentionally a powerful move that you must confront. The little rectangle in the center of this giant circle is wood, the wood planking of the Walnut Street Bridge. And it's about 18 inches by 1 foot, about the size of a human in plan. The circle is a pendulum of 150 pounds swinging would make about that circle. We proposed steel grating, very structurally quite strong, but virtually transparent when you look through, so you can stand in that spot and for that moment maybe have empathy of the incredible fear of that moment. The hangings took place on the Walnut Street Bridge as a signal that the African Americans on the other side were not to come across, or were to be mindful of behaviors when they come across. And we thought this is for us all to be mindful of our behaviors and our need to love each other. So this circle can be bypassed on either side. You don't have to walk over the grating, but if you choose to engage, you can. We put this as a space for hearing. I am, as I said before, tragically white, so why am I here talking about this story? And as I said, I'm here because we have tools that I hope are useful to others. And so to express that voice, we engaged at our cost for the competition 3 African American artists, a performance artist, a 2-dimensional artist, and a 3-dimensional artist. This is Sandy Williams, who was struck by the fact that Ed Johnson, after being hanged, was shot 50 times. And each of these is twisted steel rope rising in the air, and there are 50 of them. So it represents both the rope of the hanging, but this exhilaration rising from the ground. Our idea here was that an artist would be selected to deal with whatever the issues of the day were, make an installation, and the next year, while that installation was in place, a new artist would be selected to design something for the following year and the following year. So it would always be a changing occupation of the plaza within the context of Johnson's story. And you can see in the distance the circular cutout of the Walnut Street Bridge. This is what Sandy's idea looked like coming up the stairs through the gunshots, through these 50 vertical rods. I found this just such a moving work of art. This is Ebony Noel Golden from the South Bronx, and she envisioned a processional, almost like a New Orleans funeral of music coming from the African American community and coming from the jail that would converge in this moment of performance art. Eric Finley, Chattanooga native, 7. We got to know 7, and he did this idea of a two-dimensional work of art on the large stone wall. I will say the massive thickness of that wall was, I used to do printmaking in college, and you would grind down the limestone slab to get out the last print, and you would etch into it, make your prints, and grind down the slab. And I thought, what if we have a 3 or 4 foot thick wall that you could paint, cut, sculpt, and it gets ground down. So it's like a very deep thing that would last a century of use to use as the two-dimensional surface. So the idea of really engaging the memorial with different people's vision. So this was 7's entry in our competition. So those are the 3 different, we just sort of imagined 3 different ways 3 artists could do that. The next piece was how to make this work. So we brought Lord Cultural Resources in, and they helped us figure out how we could take the Chattanooga community, the art community, civil rights community, literary community, and the legal community with national contributors to make the artist selection, a residency jury, the project coordinator, and the 1-year residency, and then thinking about different foundations who might fund this. So we came up with a budget of what it would cost to have on hand to commission these artists every year, and came up with a calendar of the flowering of the different trees and perennials in sync with Ed Johnson's life and the stories that unfolded. So March 19th, unveil the new art, the artist in residence 3 months over the summer, announce the next artist installation, and you get to the next year. So it was intended to be an ongoing and living engagement, just as these Project Row Houses, the 9/11 Table of Silence project. These are other places, public places, that carry one story, but they're alive because we continue to engage with them. The next piece I want to share with you is the Children Victims of Violence Memorial in Nashville. I have a little bit of happy stories, I swear. This is a difficult one, as it was the last one. This is a memorial to the children under 18 who are killed in the city of Nashville every year. This is in Centennial Park, and it was Andrea Conte who was actually abducted. She was the First Lady of Tennessee, and she was abducted and struggled to freedom, lived, and took on the cause of victims of violence. And this children's memorial that a few kids in a middle school had built started having bricks made of the children that had died in their school, really captured her attention. So she commissioned us to make this memorial. And it's here on the right. It's a very small, intimate plaza. But in sitting, listening to the parents and the police telling the stories, we would sometimes reach out and hold hands or hug. And the idea of the memorial came from this very strong way of holding hands. And if you let your hands open a bit, that embrace makes a space, and that's where we need to be held. And that's this gesture of these two hands and benches coming together. This is what the memorial looks like in its setting. This is it completed. These massive stones rise up out of the ground and back into the ground, grounding us, anchoring us to the geology. And in the center is planted a tree that is the same species as a massive 80-foot tall tree next door. So we have the parent tree and the child tree. As this one grows and the other one inevitably dies, it will become the child tree. And this will go on for generations. This is it at night in the ground plane, working with Linnea Tillett. There are a couple hundred tiny dots of light, and they surge with light, and then they disappear for a minute or two. And so this place is, the light is coming and going in the ground plane, remembering the children that have been lost. And you can see the Parthenon in the distance. This has become a place of healing for the community. It's a destination not just for the victims of violence and their families, but it's a place of remembrance and community engagement. So it's a quiet and meditative place in the midst of the city. Similarly, a quiet and meditative place is the Naval Cemetery landscape at the Brooklyn Naval Yards next to the BQE. This was a site not unlike the field that was behind a hospital where many people were buried, many of whom were not known. It was a potter's field, as well as soldiers. There were very few records. In our historic research, we found that there had been a creek that wound through this site that had been filled in and then used as a burial ground. Historically, cherry orchards had filled this region of Brooklyn with a lot of immigrant communities, and that's a map of where the site is. We thought, okay, the bodies have been exhumed, taken to another cemetery, but it's still sacred ground. There are thousands of people whose names we do not know. How do we bring people into this in a contemplative way? And the idea was, the response, because we couldn't excavate, was to plant a warm season meadow with forbs and wildflowers. Make the most fecund ecosystem we could think of that would draw the most life into this place to remind us all of our connection to life and death. We would be using beauty as a way to reassure us as we all are on that journey. So that map is showing a 2-mile radius from the Naval Cemetery and all the pollinators. All the green dots are urban farming, rooftop gardens, food production within Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens. This is a bloom time calendar of the flowers. This is a historic area. You can see the large hospital from the 1700s as part of the Navy. And then this field to the back was the abandoned cemetery. And there you can see the park. The idea here was to make a river of wood that recalled the Wallabout Creek that had been there through a sea of grass. This river of wood and a sea of grass is what captured people's imaginations in this large circle planted with cherry trees, black cherry, the native cherry, that would make a high dome. We couldn't excavate, so we had to have something that could go in, bear root, and live. And I pull up a lot of black cherries in my garden in Waynesville, North Carolina. So the diagonal line you're seeing are mooring blocks that once held the ships. So all these cultural references are telling us, or knowing the place, as Noel said. And the upper right is a tiny amphitheater for gatherings, poetry, conversation. And here it is completed, this sort of sinuous boardwalk moving through this landscape. The developers, Steiner Studio, the people who bought the Brooklyn Naval Yards, did not want the cemetery for kind of obvious reasons. And so the Navy sold it, or gave it, to the Brooklyn Greenways Initiative, an 18-mile bikeway through Brooklyn as a resting place. The bikes are not allowed in here. You park your bike and then you come, and they wanted a meditative place to reflect. Using a cemetery as a park is a 19th century idea in England, Europe, many European countries, and early United States. The Olmsted brothers designed a number of cemeteries, and it used to have this idea of a place of reflection, a place of community. And I think it's a wonderful idea to bring that back, to remember. I think too much in our society, we're like, oh, it's dead, it's gone, it's over there. And it's almost convenient to say, well, we can't touch it because it's a dead body and I'm not going to go. I think it behooves us to go and engage and remember and think. We become different stewards of, I think, our relationships and our world when we're mindful of the cycles of life. Here we partnered with Marvel Architects, and they designed this portal to go in that has a gate inside the wall that slides all the way across for it to be safe at night. Here's the pollinator plants just exploding, and I think an act of pollination about to happen. It's where we all came from, with very few exceptions. There's the little amphitheater, this kind of sea of grass. This is looking at the amphitheater, looking out at the meadow. It's amazing to have this buzzing, living landscape. It works. It has brought so much life to this place of death. Here is looking out from the circle across the mooring blocks that allows people to hop and play in this kind of sacred ground. A lot of the funding for this project came from a fabulous organization called Nature Sacred. And they funded the project, and they said, well, you have to, one, put our bench in the project, and two, have an all-weather book. And it tucks in a little compartment under the bench. And for those who find the book, they write messages about what they're seeing and what they're feeling. And it's remarkable how few people do stupid stuff here. It's mostly a real record of their engagement with the natural world in a place that's pretty rough around its edges. Again, you have the BQE just a few feet away. I think one of the most moving entries was a person who was contemplating self-destruction that day and came for their last moments to the park and changed their mind based on the beauty of the place. This is the power of the landscape to heal us, to change us, and to build our sense of the connectivity to the world around us. When we see life, and that's why all of you who protect land, preserve land, and bring the public to land are my superheroes. We also, because of all the pollinators, it's a great place for beehives. So we have cemetery honey, has a little marketing problem, but it's delicious, trust me. And then just this lovely image of a child exploring this beautiful place of life. This is a very small budget with a big impact on its community. I'm going to close with one final tale. I have 2 minutes. This came up really in a conversation with Donovan today. This was not one I was going to show, but I happened to have it in my laptop. This is the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. And I raised this because as he was talking about a cemetery here in Chattanooga that has a next life, perhaps, starting to imagine these places of memory, places of remembrance as places of life. I think that's something I've realized. If we freeze our stories and put them away too far, we forget them. And if we engage with our stories on a regular basis, we remember, and we pass that remembering along to the next generations. And that's the work I think we as Americans have to do. And I particularly think about my team in indigenous studies and history of enslavement. And I realize that is a lot of the work that we have to think about when we come to land. Land is what holds these collective stories. And when we tell the truth, we start to heal. This one is, believe it or not, a fun project. I think I've tonight have talked about some very difficult issues, but I wanted to show it because this is the Cedar Dell at Greenwood Cemetery, and this holds the oldest remains and oldest stones within the whole cemetery. And this perfect circle was created in the 1860s when another cemetery was developed, and they exhumed the bodies and brought the stones. So this was all laid out at once. So Greenwood Cemetery engaged us to look at this cultural history and make some insertions. This is actually a place of performance. People come here and they have poetry readings, meditation, small musical performance is all very carefully curated, obviously, but it is a living place. And the Cedar Dell has this perfect amphitheater bowl shape. So the layout was inspired in the 1860s by the topography to make these perfect circles. And so we've added this walk to wayfind and help people arrive to the center and also not tread on the graves and come to this central plaza. And then the seating is in the mown grass around. So it has this kind of amphitheater. The band of shrubs is actually a stormwater device catching water upslope so that it doesn't erode or create a drainage problem at the bottom. And also adds a beautiful line of ornamental native plants into the center. They are doing ongoing burials. There are natural burials. There are cremains that are buried here in some of the perennial beds. And then the names are actually etched on these 3 giant boulders that we located in their workyard. So these are a place to meditate and be, but the names and dates of individuals. So it is actually an active site of remembrance. And it has become a beautiful destination within the park that has become a new landscape within a very historic one that has been quite beloved. I wanted to show that because when Donovan was talking about, protecting these historic sites, I think all of these projects are trying to underscore the authentic, to tell the truth, but tell the truth in the place where history happened. They're contemporary, they're future forward, they're future looking, but they're grounded and based on a deep understanding of both the ecological history of a place and the cultural history of a place. These are important because these are the moments where we hold hands with history. And holding hands with history does not matter what color you are or where you came from. It is our collective story, and it is how we improve ourselves as a civilization. Thank you so much for coming tonight and having me here.